Hello and welcome to today's AP Lit session. I am Susan Barber from Atlanta, Georgia. Here's my co-teacher Bear. He's hanging with us again today. We'll see if he makes it through the whole lesson. We're excited that y'all are with us. I wanted to give a shout out to Miss Adams' class in Oklahoma. I hear that they have been watching, and then they're also on a Google Hangout talking about things as we're doing this. So glad y'all are with us today. I'd also like to say thank you to my personal sponsor, Coffee, who has gotten me through all of this. I don't know about y'all, but I've been relying on coffee these days. So with me today, as always, Mr. Escobar. How are you today?
I'm doing great today, actually. Today we're talking about setting. And you're in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm in Miami, Florida. And sometimes we think that the world is very small, right? We live in our corner of the world. We live within the confines of our classroom. I know that I feel sometimes that I'm working in isolation because you close that door and it's you and those kids and we're going through these novels. But today's lesson is about setting, and I wanted to update the map that we showed yesterday because we left a lot of places out. And these are, I'm sure we're still leaving some places out, but these are some of the emails that we have received, or the locations of emails that we have received from different places in the United States. And what this tells me, there's various ways of interpreting this, right? It definitely tells me that we're not alone. It tells me that we're all studying literature. It tells me that we're all united and connected. I would like to see more people from Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona. I don't know if maybe they're still in school, or maybe they got this and they don't need these videos. But this is all about community building. So if you know that there are students out there, make sure that they're tuning in, because we like to say hello to them as well. It also tells us that we're facing this, this experience, this COVID-19 uh, crisis together. And it's not a Miami thing, and it's not a Georgia thing, and it's not even a thing of just the United States, right? We've gotten now emails from Bolivia, Albania, Jordan, and China, and these are just representatives of thousands and thousands of schools and millions of school children out there who are in their homes, worried, perhaps even bored a little bit, but definitely facing this together. But this is just such a beautiful testament to the fact that we are all coming together, whether we're in Whitman Academy in Georgia or Mrs. Phelps students in Albania, Beijing #4 high school. It's really incredible that despite the difficulties, we come together every day for about half an hour. We discuss literature and we make each other, perhaps for a slight minute, forget about some of the more horrific things that are happening in our communities. So here's a shout out to the world. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to explore setting, which is really appropriate since we're looking at maps right now.
Update. The dog is left. That didn't
Uh-oh, we
take long.
lost the
Did it?
teacher. Okay.
That did not take long. It's all on me now. So let's look. Yesterday we talked about the street and we talked about characterization. Um, how do we learn about characters? How do we read a text and pull details from a text, and then use those details to assign a trait to a character? And then, more importantly, what does that tell us about the character, and how does that fit into an overall story? So we had looked at this passage, The Street, and talked about the character of Ludi Johnson. Do we want to read this now, or do we want to read it at the end?
Let's read it at the end
Okay.
so that we can read it for setting
Great.
afterwards.
Perfect. Because we read it yesterday. So yesterday you were supposed to look at this, read this passage. We had read it yesterday also, and think about Ludi Johnson and how she is characterized. And here are some details that we pulled. Now, these are not the only details. These are just ones that stood out to us. So if you have different details, if you notice different things, that does not mean you are wrong. There's lots of answers here. There's lots of evidence here. These are things that stood out to us. So even before she's introduced as a character, we see that the wind drove most people off the street. They were bent over double, discouraged. So we see how this wind is treating all of the other people. And we can assume like the wind is, she's encountering the same harshness of the wind because she is one of the people on the street. And then she's introduced, and we see how the wind, it suddenly touches her on the back of her neck, and it makes her feel naked and bald, and she shivers, and her eyeballs are bathed with this coldness. So now we see her personally encountering the wind. And even though the wind is twisting this sign away from her, she perseveres. And at the end, it ends with this one word, reasonable, that will work for her. So what do we learn about her through this? So yesterday we said, try to come up with one adjective when you look at these details. And the character trait that we came up with to describe her is determined. And so some of the evidence that we saw, it drove most people off the street. Not her though. She shivered. Her eyeballs were bathed in a rush of coldness. She read the sign rapidly. So now we have the trait, and we have the specific evidence that we were able to figure out this trait from, to assign this trait to. And now we're going to give the commentary or the explanation of
Ms.
this
Barber,
evidence. Go ahead.
before you read the commentary, let me stress something you mentioned. You had talked about the annotations and the highlighting, and that students out there may have highlighted different things. It's the same thing with the trait, is it not? Determined is not the right
Absolutely.
word. You could have, and as a matter of fact, this is a simplified version of what we would expect you to do in your essays. We're not looking for one character adjective. If we think back to yesterday's video, the whole point is to treat these characters as three-dimensional figures, and you don't get that by just pinning them down with one word. We need multiple adjectives, and preferably adjectives that are not simply synonymous with each other, but adjectives that really help to flesh out this character. So again, just like Ms. Barber said about the highlighting, it's the same thing with the trait here. You could have 5, 6, 7 traits, and that's just adding to the complexity of your
Right.
interpretation of Ms. Johnson.
Yeah, so we're just pulling out one specific example, but that's a great point. Like, you should have several because we want to show the depth of the character and how they're complex. I mean, like if you think about us or you think about yourself, we can't be defined in one word. It would take several traits to describe you, to describe me, to describe Mr. Escobar. So we're just pulling out one for time's sake. But whatever your evidence is, that's what's going to lead you to your characterization of the person. So in this specific example, we say she's determined, and we give the evidence, and now we'll look at the commentary. Despite the unrelenting attack of the environment, which had already driven, quote, most of the people off the street, beautifully embedded there, Ludi Johnson is determined to seek shelter for her family. Her steadfastness speaks to, and now we're going to get to this motivation, this agency. Why is she doing this? Her steadfastness speaks to her commitment to those whom she loves and to the honorable nature of Miss Johnson herself, while also suggesting that she's accustomed to facing seemingly insurmountable obstacles. So now we have taken this evidence, and we've taken this one trait that we've assigned it to this evidence, and we've explained how we got there. And then if we had other traits, then we could talk about how these traits work together to form a full character or a multi-dimensional character.
And if we're talking about progression of ideas, a logical progression, then which trait do you mention first? Then is there a reason for mentioning one over the other? Ms. Barber, you brought something up, and I know we're going to have a video lesson on this later on, but you cheated a little. You're showing us how smart you are, because you talked about the embedded quotation. For those students out there who may not know what you mean by that, can you maybe elucidate that a bit?
So we're in the commentary where you say, which had already driven, quote, most of the people off the street. That is just written, that quote is written just straight into your thoughts. You're not pausing and saying, the author said, or the author describes Ludi Johnson as, quote, this, and you set it off with a comma or you set it off with a colon. You're just pulling out a few words and you're putting it right in your writing, in your thoughts. And I love when you do this because I think that really lets you get down to some deep level analysis, because you're pulling out really specific phrases and specific words and integrating them with your thoughts. And it's just this seamless flow between the two. But again, we'll have a whole lesson on that.
Absolutely. But thank you for that, because I think it's important for students to start thinking about how it is that they include the evidence into their essay. And just like when we talked about thesis statements, that there are, what was your analogy? There's the roadmap, and then there's the engine, or the brownie, right? The simple,
Right.
delicious brownie, perfectly
Of
good
course.
brownie. And then there's that great monster brownie that everyone would love to have in front of them right now. Just like there's differences there, and just like there's different levels of sophistication in the creation of a thesis, there's different levels of sophistication in the way that you present your evidence in your writing. So I would definitely want all students to tune into that video lesson whenever it is. You got to check out the calendar, because I think that's something that's really going to elevate your writing.
Yes. So today we are going to shift from characterization and we're going to talk about setting. And specifically what we want to do is to identify and describe specific textual details that convey or reveal a setting. And then, you know, by now, we don't just stop with the identification. We need to understand what is the function of the setting in this specific text. So details in a text can reveal specific aspects of the setting. Those are the things we're going to be looking at. How do we identify that? The location, time of day, year, season, geography, culture. But then we have to take the next step. Why are those things important? And often the setting establishes mood or atmosphere in the text. Sometimes the setting, you know, I think about Frankenstein, sometimes the setting, it really mirrors what's happening in the character's heart. So we see it that way too. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We want to, by the end of this lesson, to be able to evaluate setting, because it allows us to determine the values that are significant in a text. Sometimes we'll even see passages, and I think we're going to look at an example today, that have conflicting setting, and then we have these contrasts that really highlight things for us.
And we see the level of sophistication here, right? Where we start with a description, identification and description, we move on to function, and then the possibility of having multiple settings in one text. I mean, that's a lot for us to juggle, but honestly, it makes it more interesting, and it gives you more fodder for your essays. So the more sophisticated the setting, I think the more that we can capitalize on it for our interpretation of the text. So as we enter the guided practice section today, let's talk about what setting is. Let's talk about what we normally think of as setting. And you know, when I'm trying to think back to elementary school and I think of setting, I'm just thinking of place, right? I'm thinking here we are in New York or in Washington, D.C., in Disney World, at the park, at the fair, up on the mountains, by the beach, staring at a sunrise and the snow. It's so easy, I think, to look at a picture and recognize where we are. We're just talking about the physical description of the setting. And this takes us back to what you were saying in that first bullet: identify and describe the specific details. You know, that doesn't take a lot of thinking. It doesn't take a lot of effort to be able to stare at this. You may not know the exact location, but no one is asking you that. It's just, hey, where are we generally, and can you describe the place? So if you look, let's say, at the bottom left-hand corner, we can say, well, I see mountains, I see trees, that may be water or clouds. It's actually clouds. We're up in a mountain here. Um, But that didn't take much effort. What Miss Barber was telling you is once you have done this, and we start here because we have to ground ourselves, right? We have to know exactly where we are before we start talking about the function. But it is the function that is significant here. It doesn't matter that we're in Denmark. It doesn't matter that we're in Scotland. I'm thinking of Hamlet and Macbeth. It matters. Well, why is that significant? Why is that setting significant? What are the values of those places? What are the political situations of those places in that time period? That's what Shakespeare was capitalizing on by placing these characters in those situations. Of course, there are also some historical context there that he's also capitalizing on. So what can setting do, right? We spoke about characterization yesterday, and we started with giving you the vocabulary. By all means, that was not an exhaustive list, but we gave you the words to use, right? So if a teacher tells you describe this character, you could quickly turn to that uh, sheet, or that, if you took a picture of it and say, well, that character is, and you start picking out adjectives. Well, if a teacher asks you what's the function of the setting, well, what does the answer sound like at that point? Well, a setting could act as a character.
Mhm.
Um, there are a couple of videos ago, I mentioned the 100 Years of Solitude and Ursula. That the house, the Buendia house in that novel, is a character. It evolves, it changes, it regresses, it progresses, and it affects the inhabitants. So it's functioning at the level of character. It can affect character action and motivation. I think we see that all the time in stories. It can illustrate irony, right? How are the events peculiar or funny or unexpected because they're taking place where they are taking place? Miss Barber mentioned it mirrors the plot, and I want you to think about that. What does Miss Barber mean by that? I want you, perhaps a lot of you have read um, the Kate Chopin's short story, The Story of an Hour. And in that one, if you've read it, if you haven't, it'll take you 10 minutes to read that short story, but maybe a lifetime to study it. It's a great one. But in that one, there's a moment where the Mrs. Mallard, the protagonist, is in her room, and she's looking at an open window, and there are birds and there's sunshine and spring is in the air, and she's feeling absolutely happy and liberated. So there you see the relationship between what's happening with human beings, and there's a term for that, um, and what's happening out in nature. So that's what, correct, Ms. Barber? That's what you were referring to with
Mhm.
mirror.
Yep,
Provides
exactly.
symbolism, and perhaps the symbolism could be tied sometimes to that mirroring the plot. But is the the gloomy day, the cloudy setting, or is it raining and we're in this period of rebirth for the character? That's where plot might setting may act as a symbol. It could reveal the nature of the characters.
Mhm.
Why is it that this character is drawn to this setting, for instance? And I'm thinking of in Paradise Lost, pandemonium, that sound that these spirits make when they're in hell and they're in these caves and they're lamenting. The fact that they are there says something about who they are. I had spoken about Linden Hills a couple of videos ago, and the inhabitants of Linden Hills live where they do because of what they do and who they are or who they have become. So that's another interesting connection there between setting and the nature of the characters. And I think we all can agree that setting sets the atmosphere or the mood for a particular story. So if this is what setting can do, well, what should we do? Right? What should readers do when we encounter setting, when we read a story and we can recognize where it takes place, and knowing that setting can do all these things? Well, the answer is simple: question everything.
Mhm.
That's really what we have to do when we encounter text. What is the significance of time? What does the physical location suggest? What are the implications of the weather? And how are these various settings, if there are multiple settings, how are they juxtaposed? And what does that friction or coming together of these two settings reveal about the characters and the thematic concerns or the central ideas in the text? This is a lot. And this is a slide that I want every student to take a picture of. And I'm assuming some teachers will take a picture of this one, because I think that it really organizes the possibilities for setting and our task as readers when we're thinking about setting in a text. It's not just about where we are, but it's about the function of that setting. Ms. Barber,
Yeah,
you were going
and
to
I was
chime
going
in?
to say at the end of the week, I will drop a document in our notes, and maybe I'll go ahead and put it every day, but it will have all of the central questions for each of the elements that we're dealing with. So the questions for characterization, the questions for setting, the questions for point of view. So I'll have a document. I already have it. I just need to share it, and we'll put it in the description link.
Absolutely. That'll be very useful, I think, for everyone out there. And it'll be found in the YouTube description
Correct.
at the bottom.
Yep.
So we've already discussed about regarding setting, that we can look at it and describe it and identify where we are. We've already discussed the function of setting, and we have to organize our ideas. And if you've seen a pattern, we've developed these charts now, because I think it's important for you to think as you're reading, annotate the text if you can, and then organize those ideas into something that can be useful tool for you once you sit down to write your essay. I think it's self-explanatory, but I'll let you guys take a picture of it if you want to replicate it on your own time. We're going to put it into action, though. We're going to look at George Orwell's 1984. By the way, here is a picture of Anne Petrie's The Street. Highly recommend it. This was your homework assignment, so it comes from this novel. And now we are going to talk about, this is like our commercial break where we talk
Do
about
you have
books.
every book written?
Just about 2,000 of them, but not every book written. No. We have 1984, George Orwell. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this
Yep.
one. And later on today, in case I forget to bring it up, we're going to talk about Paul Marshall's Brown Girl Brownstones, a great novel. And we had spoken about Toni Morrison earlier in the week. Was it this week or last week? I can't keep my days straight anymore, but I don't feel that bad because I know you can't either, folks.
Mhm.
But we had spoken about Toni Morrison, and she passed away. And it was such a loss, right, to the world, to the literary world, for sure. And Paul Marshall passed away within the same week or month as Toni Morrison. So we lost two incredible literary giants very close to each other. And I believe that there was an article written about the loss of these two women but amazing figures in the literary world in the New York Times. I think perhaps Edwige Danticat wrote the article. And it was just a great memorial to these ladies. But here we have George Orwell, 1984. And let's read it. I'll begin if you'd like. It was and this is from the beginning, from the very first two paragraphs in the novel. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him.
The hallway smelt of boiled cabbage and old rag mats. At one end, the colored poster, too large for an indoor display, had been tacked on the wall. It depicted simply an enormous face, more than a meter wide. The face of a man of about 45 with a heavy black mustache and ruggedly handsome features. Winston made for the stairs. It was no use trying the lift. Even at the best of times, it was seldom working, and at present, the electric current was cut off during daylight hours. It was part of the economy drive in preparation for Hate Week.
Exactly. I'm going to take a break right now and share something with you guys, because we are live, we are connected. People saw the map we showed earlier, and we're represented, folks. Okay, we heard from Utah and Montana, so hello to Utah and hello from Montana. And we heard from the teacher in Albania who says she teared up and she loves the connection with literature, and something she stated is the connection to humanity. And that is what literature is about. I try to talk to my children about it all the time. When we're reading stories, we're reading people, right?
I
We're
got a
reading people.
I got a Toronto, Canada email too
Well,
since we
well,
started.
you know, Ms. Barber, I think our job is done, right? I think we've connected the world. We're not alone, people. We're not alone. We're not alone in this crisis. We're not alone in our love of literature. So keep the emails coming. I don't even know. I guess they go to our school website. You know, we don't advertise these things. It's just um, our humanity, I guess, drives us together and not apart, which is a wonderful thing. So let's go back to Orwell. Talk about uh, humanity in 1984, which is an interesting concept. Um, we've read this and we're talking about setting, and there's a lot of different details, but it's important, I think, for us to know that not all the details are about the place. Not all the details are about the description of the location. Look at the last thing we highlighted here. These this place, these people are preparing for hate week. You mentioned something, Ms. Barber. Part of the function of setting is getting to the values of the people who inhabit the place. Here we are in these live lessons. I thought we were just going to talk about literature, and we're talking about humanity, and we're talking about, you know, our connection to each other, though we're miles and miles apart. These people are preparing for hate week. What does that tell us about the place? And how is that not significant to what Orwell is commenting on in 1984? So setting is much more than just place. However, if we organize this, we're going to see that we're actually talking about two places. We get descriptions of the outside. We also get descriptions of the building he enters, Victory Mansions. And the way that we've organized things here is, you know, the description is where we, in our own words, pick out details or give a description of the location. But then we ground ourselves in the textual evidence, and we took that directly from the text. But then we talk about function. But you know, and I think they're getting used to it now, we're not always giving you answers. Sometimes we give you no answer at all. That's when we're the happiest because you got to do all the work. But sometimes we meet you halfway. So here's an instance where we're going to meet you halfway. And we're going to say that the environment that surrounds the speaker is, or the character rather, perhaps we should have said, is uninviting and oppressive, dot, dot, dot. Right? Like we can add some more to that. If you want to have an idea as to what else you could add, rewind this video later, watch it again, and look at the example we gave you with Ludi Johnson at the beginning when we went over the homework. And you're going to see how we can flesh out that statement a little more. But then you have Victory Mansions, which we left empty. So this is your opportunity to rewatch the video, pause, reread the excerpt from 1984, and try to fill in these boxes for yourself. But all we have here is description with some brief comment on function, but can we now take it to the values of the inhabitants, and can we connect the values and the function of setting to a central idea in the text? You know, we had talked about how this course is so interconnected. The three questions are interconnected. This notion of the central idea in the work as a whole is a sort of question three language, but it shouldn't live with question three. That's our study of literature. How is this text a mirror to humanity, to ourselves, and we as mirrors or representatives of humanity? All these things are interconnected. So don't stop at the text. Use the text as a launching pad for discussion of big ideas about the world, which is something that Ms. Barber had talked about also when it comes to essay writing. If you come up with these big ideas, don't wait to leave it for the conclusion or your final, wow statement. No, embed that throughout the text, because if it's really a big idea, it's got to be central to your own claims and argument. So let's see if you have been following along. For check for understanding, we're going to work with Miss Marshall's Brown Girl Brownstones. In the somnolent July afternoon, the unbroken line of brownstone houses down the long Brooklyn street resembled an army massed at attention. They were all one uniform red-brown stone, all with high, massive stone stoops and black iron grill fences staving off the sun, all draped in ivy as though mourning. Their somber facades, indifferent to the summer's heat and passion, faced the park while their backs reared dark against the sky. They were only 3 or 4 stories tall, squat, yet they gave the impression of formidable height.
Glancing down the interminable Brooklyn street, you thought of those joined brownstones as one house reflected through a train of mirrors, with no walls between the houses, but only vast rooms yawning endlessly, one into the other.
So what are the details here, Miss Barber, that
So much setting to dig into in this passage. Um, we open in July, and then we're looking down the street. A lot of figurative language, even in this passage, which we'll be doing a whole lesson on that. But we have this draped ivy, it's morning, and then following up on the morning, the somber facades, indifferent again to this oppressive heat coming down. No walls between the houses, just vast rooms yawning. So we read that, and it does more than put us in a place. It does more than that.
And it's interesting because we've been talking about adjectives, but the verbs here are incredible. The
Mhm.
morning and the yawning, what does that say, right?
Those are my
About a
favorites.
place,
Yeah.
yeah. So we would fill in, again, a graphic organizer here, and we haven't done any of the work for them, right, Ms. Barber?
We have not.
We're tired. We're getting old. You guys have to do all the work.
They're big boys and big girls. That's what I say.
And again, you can mirror what we did with 1984 here, but really dig in. Sometimes when you get a whole passage, it's intimidating, right? And you have to write an essay, but these are scaffolds. These are vehicles through which you can practice the skill and be successful at it before you tackle an entire essay. But remember, try to get to the values of the inhabitants and try to get to connecting the setting to a central idea in the text. That's critical.
So we're going to let you practice with that tonight. Before we do, let's debrief a little and just review what we talked about. We talked about number one, being able to identify specific details. What what do we see? The location, the time of day, the year, the season, the culture of a place, the geography of a place, all of these things, identification. But that is just step number one. We cannot stop there. We have to move on and ask the question, why are these things important? How do these things expand the meaning in the text? So we move on to function and think about the relationship between the setting and other literary elements like maybe character, maybe a central idea, maybe the plot. It could be. So next, how does the setting affect the readers of the text? And finally, how do the text various settings contribute to this overall controlling or central idea? Those are the things that you're going to be looking for and the things that we talked about today. So we're going to go back to the street and use that passage again. So yesterday, we asked you to look at Ludi Johnson and look at her characterization. Today, though, we're going to look at this passage again, and we are going to focus on setting. And what a great passage to think about setting and work with setting. There's so much in here.
And as we read it this time, we want you guys to jot down some notes on your paper. Perhaps just write down line numbers that you think that you want to go back to. You will be writing the full essay today because you've already looked at it. We've looked at it once for characterization. Now we're looking at it for setting. You may want to complete the charts that we shared with you though before you write the essay. Okay, we're not timing you for these homework assignments right now. So let's start with the prompt. The following selection is the opening of Anne Petrie's 1946 novel, The Street. Read the selection carefully and then write an essay analyzing how Petrie establishes Ludi Johnson's relationship to the urban setting through the use of such literary devices as imagery, personification, selection of detail, and figurative language. Notice the crux of the prompt, how Petrie establishes Ludi Johnson's relationship to the urban setting. That's why we gave you this, and we started with characterization. It's not an essay on setting. It's not an essay
Mhm.
on characterization. It's an essay on the union between this character and this setting. If we take this character and we place her anywhere else, we're going to see a different dimension to Ludi Johnson. If we take someone else and place them in this setting, we're going to have a different understanding of the setting. But when you take Ludi Johnson, and now we know Ludi Johnson, you did homework on Ludi Johnson, and when we analyze the setting that she's placed in and we talk about the relationship, now we're going to be determining Petrie's purpose for this union and for the work as a whole eventually. So let's reread it. We're focusing on setting this time.
I'll start for us. There was a cold November wind blowing through 116th Street. It rattled the tops of garbage cans, sucked window shades out through the top of open windows, and set them flapping back against windows. And it drove most of the people off the street in the block between 7th and 8th Avenues, except for a few hurried pedestrians who bent double in an effort to offer the least possible exposed surface to its violent assault.
When I'm giving this to students, and perhaps we can offer some assistance, they don't know where we are. But when you see 116th Street and 7th and 8th Avenue, and later on we're going to be talking about the theater district,
Mhm.
a good guess. And look, all it is a guess. We don't have the whole novel in front of us when we're giving these passages, but we were told it's an urban setting in the prompt, and then with some other details. Some students do arrive at the fact that we're in New York City.
Mhm.
Um, and that's a good guess. That's a good guess. It doesn't say it, it doesn't state it, but it's, if you can visualize um, New York City, then I think you're going to get a clear picture of the setting here. It found every scrap of paper along the street, theater throwaways, announcements of dances and lodge meetings, the heavy waxed paper that loaves of bread had been wrapped in, the thinner waxed paper that had enclosed sandwiches, old envelopes, newspapers. Fingering its way along the curb, the wind set the bits of paper to dancing high in the air, so that a barrage of paper swirled into the faces of the people on the street. It even took time to rush into doorways and areaways and find chicken bones and pork chop bones and push them along the curb.
It did everything it could to discourage the people walking along the street. It found all the dirt and dust and grime on the sidewalk and lifted it up so the dirt got into their noses, making it difficult to breathe. The dust got into their eyes and blinded them, and the grit stung their skins. It wrapped newspaper around their feet, entangling them until the people cursed deep in their throats, stamped their feet, kicked at the paper. The wind blew it back again and again until they were forced to stoop and dislodge the paper with their hands. And then the wind grabbed their hats, pried their scarves from around their neck, stuck its fingers inside their coat collars, blew their coats away from their bodies.
The wind lifted Ludi Johnson's hair away from the back of her neck so that she felt suddenly naked and bald, for her hair had been resting softly and warmly against her skin. Nice juxtaposition there. She shivered as the cold fingers of the wind touched the back of her neck, explored the sides of her head. It even blew her eyelashes away from her eyes so that her eyeballs were bathed in a rush of coldness and she had to blink in order to read the words and the signs swaying back and forth over her head. Syntax?
Each time she thought she had the sign in focus, the wind pushed it away from her so that she wasn't certain whether it said 3 rooms or 2 rooms. If it was 3, why, she would go in and ask and see, but if it was 2, why? There wasn't any point. Even with the wind twisting the sign away from her, she could see that it had been there for a long time because its original coat of white paint was streaked with rust where years of rain and snow had finally eaten the paint off down to the metal, and the metal had slowly rusted, making a dark red stain like blood.
It was 3 rooms. The wind held it still for an instant in front of her, and then swooped it away until it was standing at an impossible angle on the rod that suspended it from the building. She read it rapidly. 3 rooms, steam heat, parquet floors, respectable tenants. Reasonable.
So that's what we're looking at tonight. We looked at Ludi Johnson yesterday. Now we want to look at the setting. And, you know, how does the setting even, what does it tell us the interaction between the setting and Ludi Johnson? How does this add more depth to her character? What might this say about a central idea in here? So we'd love for you to explore that tonight, jot down some ideas, use the graphic organizer if you need to organize your thoughts, and we will pick up there tomorrow. So we're excited that y'all were with us again today. We just love hanging out with you and sharing some time that we can just dive into literature for a few minutes and just connect over literature. If you know someone who doesn't have access, again, reach out to College Board, and they are committed to helping them get what they need to take the exam. So thank you again. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And Bear joined us. He's back. So he made it back. See y'all tomorrow.
Goodbye, guys.